Okay, welcome to a video for section 1.5, which is on ratios, rates, and conversions. This page of 4 vocabulary cards will be found on Canvas, as well as the instructions for what you need to do. If you do not have a printer, you can copy these down on a piece of paper or use index cards. Alright, so let's begin. Our first word is ratio. A ratio is basically a comparison of two numbers. Specifically, that comparison is by division. And there's two ways that we write ratios. If we have the ratio of A to B, then we can write it in two different ways. You can use the fraction notation where you write it as A over B, or you can use the colon notation, A to B. In both cases, since A came first, A needs to be first. The order does matter. And B, which came second, will be either in the denominator or on the second part. Okay, so let's look at some examples. Okay, the first example I put down here was 7 boys to 10 girls. That could be a ratio of students in a class. And so that basically says for every 7 boys there are 10 girls. Second example I have is 4 cups of oil to 6 cups of vinegar. Now this particular one could be for a recipe of some kind, but it can also be reduced. We should always reduce our ratios. So 4 and 6, we can reduce those by 2 and really get a ratio of 2 to 3. So let's add that to characteristics. Ratios are always reduced. They can start off not reduced, but we should reduce them. Okay, so lastly, non-examples. So we could do the example of just one sort of number, like 5 liters of milk. That's not a ratio because we're not comparing it to something else. All right, let's go on to the next word that we're going to do, which is going to be rates. A rate is a specific type of ratio that compares quantities measured in different units. So when I say units, I could be talking about cups, tablespoons, inches, feet, gallons, that kind of a thing. As far as characteristics, it's just helpful to keep in mind that this is a type of ratio. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So the first example I have is 300 miles in 5 hours. And so it's got different units. We have miles and hours, completely different units. And then the second example I have is 210 calories for 3 cookies. So again, completely different units. Other examples might be talking about money, like 3 tacos for $12. We do use rates a lot in our everyday life. A non-example would be something that is not going to have different units. For example, we could have 2 feet to 20 feet. These are the same units. Okay, going on from unit, our next word is going to be a type of unit, and that is a unit rate. So what is a unit rate? A unit rate is a rate with a denominator of 1. And so basically you could think of it as it's not just reduced, but that denominator is completely turned into a 1. And so we use unit rates a little bit more than we would talk about rates in general. So let's look at some examples. First example is 60 miles per 1 hour, or more familiar to you, we might write that as 60 miles per hour, but this is a unit rate because it's talking specifically about 1 hour. So this is actually a reduction of this example that we had right here, which was 300 miles in 5 hours. Normally we wouldn't talk about how many miles we go in 5 hours. We want to talk about how many miles we're going in 1 hour. And so then reducing that, we get the unit rate. And so similar to that, we could take the second example about calories and cookies. If the calories in 3 cookies is 210 calories, then we can reduce that to say that there are 70 calories per one cookie. Some non-examples, well, we could just use any example that we already did. We could have, 4 feet into a ratio of 5 miles. Because the 5 is not a 1, this is not a unit rate. So basically think of the word unit to be talking about 1. Okay. Last definition that we're going to look at is conversion factor. So conversion factors are very handy when we want to go and move from one unit to the other, such as changing miles into feet or inches into centimeters. Pretty much any like unit, so like units of length or units of volume or units of area or whatnot, and we want to change one to the other, then we're going to use a conversion factor. So the definition of a conversion factor is a ratio of two equivalent measures in different units. So a good example is we have, say, 1 foot over 12 inches. Since 1 foot is the same length as 12 inches, they are equivalent to each other, but they're measured in different units. So this is going to help us do a conversion from maybe feet to inches or from inches to feet. Now, you could alternately switch the order. You could say 12 inches over 1 feet. There are times when we would prefer one or the other, and that's when we're going to get into examples of unit analysis, which will be coming up. A non-example could be anything where they're not equivalent or they're not unit measures, or when we were looking at 60 miles per hour, okay, yes, this is a rate. Okay, 60 miles does not equal an hour. Miles and hours are completely different units from each other. One of them is a distance, the other one is a time. Okay, part 2 is going to look specifically at some examples of finding these things or using them to solve questions.